We are convening a meeting of the Police and Fire Commission this evening. Nice to see everyone here and interested in the process. We don't have anything on our agenda other than the community listening session. I would note that all the members of the commission are here. What we'll do is we will have a question and answer session with the candidates for the police chief position, and Harry Hawkins from the Nehemiah Center has graciously agreed to act as the moderator for the session. And in a few minutes, I'll be turning it over to him. But I just wanted to just introduce the members of the PFC, who I think you've all seen if you've been to meetings before, but Ann Tiemann, Ann, if you could just wave. There's Ann. Tom Stolper. Hi, Tom. Joe Fontaine. And Jeff Simmons. All right. We selected 4 candidates for as finalists for the police chief position. Since we selected those 4 candidates, 2 of the candidates have withdrawn from consideration. Patrick Huey and James McGillis withdrew, one because they accepted a different position that was offered to them, and the other for family reasons that they felt would prevent them from really committing themselves to the job where they hired. We have 2 remaining excellent candidates, Sara Deuman, the acting police chief of the city of Monona, and Brian Chaney Austin, who is a captain in the city of Madison Police Department. And those are the people you will be seeing and getting to know a little bit this evening. This process all started back in the fall of last year, really earlier than that, when Wally Ostringa announced that he was retiring. And it's been a bit of a process. We started by selecting consultants to help us guide us through this, and we chose GovHR and Joe DeLopez and Lee McCann ably assisted us, and they are here tonight as well, provided us with a lot of guidance in terms of coming up with a position announcement, deciding how to approach this, helping us decide or advertising the position to get it a lot of broad coverage in a lot of different places to try to get a good candidate response. And we ended up getting 24 applications. And we considered those 24 at a couple different meetings. We finally were able to narrow them down to about 9, and we asked 9 people to submit additional information, including the videos, which now have been posted to the city's website. And I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at the videos of the candidates, but they're very, very good. And they were very helpful in letting us get that group down to the final 4 finalists that we announced after our last meeting. We also worked with the Nehemiah Center, who was extremely helpful in helping us with community input. We developed a questionnaire with GovHR and the Nehemiah Center that we got a pretty good response to, and I think the responses to that are also on the city's website. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, it is interesting in terms of where the community is in policing issues. We had a prior community listening session, I think in February, that I thought went pretty well. And we got some input from members of the community at that session. But we wanted to schedule another session where members of the community could learn a little bit about the finalists and at least kind of see them, in action, responding to questions and telling us a little bit about themselves. After this session, we will meet to do final interviews of the candidates on Monday, May 10th. And we hope and plan to select the final choice for the chief of police following those interviews. We will interview and then deliberate, and we are now in the process of developing our questions for those interviews. And part of what is going to happen tonight is to permit us to listen to the candidates and listen to their responses to questions and further hone and refine what we want to talk to them about on Monday. And there will be, after this is done, Brian Gadow will give us information about how to submit feedback from members of the public about the candidates and about, how they weigh, further information we should be seeking from the candidates, other questions we should ask, and there will be a process for that. So I think that covers kind of where we are and how we got here. And with that, I will turn it over to Harry Hawkins, who again is graciously agreed to act as a moderator.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. This is a joy for me. This is HR background, so I love giving interviews, so this is great. First question I think will be fairly easy. I pose to both of you. How would you all like me to address you this evening? By title, by first name, first last name? How would you like me to address you?
I answer really to hey you, but Mr. Hawkins, Brian or Mr. Chaney Austin, Brian is perfectly fine. Thank you.
And I'm just fine with Sarah. Thank you.
Awesome. I just wanted to make sure. So it's easy for me to ask instead of try to guess, because I'm a horrible guesser at that. So thank you so much. So we're going to start with a kind of an easy question. And I think first, I'm sorry, let me explain the process. So one, we're going to ask each candidate the same questions. Once they answer the questions, I will answer some follow-up questions. And so the follow-up questions will depend on what they answer. So the follow-up questions might be a little different. And then if there's something that somebody needs to respond to after that, we'll have a little time, because we only have 2 candidates instead of 4. So we have a little bit more time to kind of have a more intimate conversation tonight. So, and just so the audience knows, we did collect information and questions from the community. And so we have worked those into our questions and tried to capture the themes. So if you submitted a question, you might not hear your exact question, but we have taken those into consideration and tried to make sure that we are answering all of the theme of questions that we can. So let's go ahead and get started. So Sarah, I'll ask this, I'll have you respond first. So a real easy one. Please describe the ideal relationship between the police department and its community.
Well, an ideal relationship, I guess, in my opinion, is a community that works together to solve any issues that the community feels are important to them. If they don't feel like they have enough of a good relationship with the police department, there creates problems or maybe fear in reaching out to us. And so it's just very important for us to be able to work with our community and all members of our community.
And thank you for that. And so you mentioned working together. And right now, it's not a secret that there's a lot of division in our community. So how would you go about, if you were given the opportunity to be chief of Monona Police Department, how would you go about working with people who some groups just don't see eye to eye on things like police and policing in our communities?
Well, one of the things that we have worked on, and I'm hoping that it has helped with our community, is after certain events last year, we did work through the 8 Can't Wait campaign, and we modified some of our policies I believe that we definitely need to continue to look at our policies and issues that we have here that maybe modifying those policies might help with those relationships. In addition to that, we are also working on Good Neighbor project right now, where we're trying to get some more engagement with the police department and members of the community, so, neighborhoods, just kind of get more of that close-knit relationship with them. I believe just overall transparency, putting our information out there to the public and asking for their input in what they want to see us doing, enforcing laws, those kinds of things will be helpful as well. We, I guess, any of those type of activities, if there's community events that we see taking place, I would envision us trying to become more involved in working with those, communities, if it's, different communities, people of color, that have, I know we have certain events at the parks, reach out to them and just see if there's something that we can do to engage with them, whether it be at their events or some way that we can help them make those successful. And I guess, again, just putting ourselves out there and allowing their input with anything that we do that involves the community itself.
Thank you. And so, Brian, I'll ask you the same question. Please describe the ideal relationship between a police department and its community.
Great. Thank you very much. One of the things going into this process that I've mentioned to several in the community, and I've made a commitment to myself, is that I'm going to remain Brian throughout all of this. And hopefully you will see sort of in my responses, what I feel moving forward is the appropriate style that I bring. But also, some of the experiences that I've had in both my personal life and in law enforcement. And so I wanted to preface that and then give you this answer. We have two things going on here. Your question is in what is the ideal status, or what should the ideal situation be? I'll give you the reality. The reality is that there's a gap trust. The reality is that certain aspects of the community do feel safe in the community, but others do not. And so we need to work on bridging that divide and bridging that gap. And ideally, we would be interwoven. We would be operating in an inter-network way in which we receive feedback, we solicit that feedback, we exchange information, we exchange ideas, we listen to what all aspects of this community say. And by the way, when I mention community, I don't mean just residents and business owners, because me as a non-Monona community resident, for now, hopefully, a non-Monona community resident, I am still impacted by the police department when I drive through, when I have conversations, or how I feel as I'm driving through the city of Monona. And so when I mean community, I'm talking in a broader sense. Ideally, Mr. Hawkins and community members, that relationship is interwoven, that we would not act without first having that understanding with members of the community. And so there's a broad range of philosophies and how best to get to that end goal, that ideal situation. I think I've presented some during my process of how I best wish to enact those goals, be it through community engagement in particular, reestablishing and reaffirming and opening up new dialogue and new relationships with members of the community. And I think that that's pivotal to get to our goal. And so I'm ready for your follow-up question, which I have no doubt there will be.
Yes, no, that's great. So you talked about soliciting feedback and listening. How do you incorporate feedback that might be negative or that highlights the lack of trust? How do you incorporate that feedback if that is a minority voice, right? Like if most of the community feels safe and there's a group that doesn't, how do you solicit that? How do you incorporate that feedback into your plans?
Yeah, great question. Marginalized and underrepresented communities have a voice, have an equal voice. And so you're right. There's that tricky balancing act between what is when it comes to implementing policy or implementing change, while also recognizing that these voices need to be heard. I'm not willing to have a conversation without all members of the issue in the room. We're going to hit pause, and I'm going to wait until he, she, or they is able to join those discussions. And it's not utopia. We're not always going to get along. We're not always going to be able to satisfy every single individual. What we can do is uphold our oath to the Constitution, to the city charter, and to make sure that we as law enforcement officers execute our oath and making sure that all feel that they are working, operating, traveling through a fair and just community, and have a sense of safety. And so I'll shorten my answer to that question in telling you that they will be recognized, and the implementation of their ideas somehow, in some way, we need to try to incorporate into our policies, because they are important. Even though they're not the majority, they need to be recognized. We wouldn't be where we're at, and I frankly wouldn't be here were it not for the marginalized community standing up and speaking up on something that they were not the majority of. And so we need to remember our history, and we need to move that forward. And I know that the many great people in this community appreciate and understand that, because I've worked with so many of you, and I've listened in on many the challenging discussions we've had about race and policing. And I know that there's that middle line understanding there between members of the community, and I believe we can reach that.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sara, I'd like to ask another follow-up question from you. You mentioned when you were soliciting feedback that one of the ways you might do that is hosting events and inviting people to come to your events. So what would it look like? Give me an example. If you were hosting an event, how would you get people who don't trust the police to come to your event at a park, let's say?
Well, that's a good point. I guess in thinking about, we do, August, generally, we kind of have our national night out. I know that's not a specific event that you're talking about, but I would envision something similar to that. Putting the information out, through social media and our city website, and I guess just really encouraging people to come and have those conversations with us at the events. Obviously we can't force them to come, but if there's some way that we can advertise, in certain areas that are, kind of our target audience, that would, I think, help with that. And then as we do with the National Night Out, if we can have, certain things there, bounce house, that kind of thing, to encourage, people to come and see us, and maybe they won't come specifically to see us, but if we can engage with them at some of those events, and possibly, have conversations with them there, that might lead to at least the beginnings of conversations, just kind of the icebreaker of, we're here for you. We hope that you feel like that we're approachable. And again, just the initial conversations, and that's probably going to be one of the most difficult things, is to at least get to that point, and hopefully build from there.
Thank you. And Brian, I have a similar follow-up question for you. You talked about being able to bridge the gap and hoping that the police and the community were interwoven. What does it look like for you, for a police department to be interwoven with the community?
Yeah, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but it's easy for me to express this in these terms. I don't expect the community to come to me. I'm going to go to the community. I'm going to be in churches. I'm going to be reaching out to media networks. I'm going to be engaging in places where I believe those members of the community rest and feel comfortable. And I will try to introduce myself in those spaces. And then be informative and try to offer that opportunity for an invitation to an event or bring us to them. And so, that's not easy. I've sat in many of meetings where it's uncomfortable, it's challenging, it's hard. It's hard to receive criticism. I've been in this profession for 20 years. I'm proud to be a cop. And I will always say that. I'm not proud of some of the things that law enforcement has done. I'm not proud of some of the things that specific officers have done, but I am proud of what the majority is trying to do. And for those within the Monona Police Department and other police departments who are putting on a badge every day to risk their lives for people who they've never met. And my goal, Mr. Hawkins and others, is to try to get to them and provide opportunity for engagement where they sit and where they lie.
Thank you. And you said something. I'm going to move to the second question now, and Brian, I'm going to start with you this time because you I don't know if you're cheating and watching my sheet. No, I'm kidding. He's not cheating. But no, they don't know the questions. We'll just keep it lighthearted tonight. But you mentioned kind of what you hope to do. So, what would your plans and goals be during your first 90 days as police chief? What would you hope to accomplish in those first 90 days?
Thank you. There's a two-part mission in my philosophy. Number one, I know Monona police officers and employees to be good people. I know they do exceptional work. I think that there's opportunity for leadership. That's why I'm putting in. I want to get to know them. I want to get to know their thoughts. I want to get to know sort of what went wrong, what went right, what we can do better. It's going to take some time for the new kid on the block to acclimate and to earn that respect. It doesn't come just by title. And I appreciate and respect that. Having been through 4 chiefs myself in my current employment, trust me, I understand that. And I understand that there's a learning curve and you have to work with the membership of which you're leading. But I can also say that is not necessarily the priority. So the other half of that is that same engagement, that same conversation, that same what went well, what didn't, what we need to do now. I'm going to do that in the community. And I'm going to make sure that both of those are happening bilaterally, that they're both happening consecutively, that I'm engaging both internal discussions as well as external discussions in the community about what you expect from your police department, what you expect from your police chief, and what we can do together to attain those goals. I know I'm going to be frustrated at times. I'm going to be happy and content and hopefully some relief sometimes of some of the great work that's already being done. But I also know that there's a struggle and that there's some work to be done. And interim Chief Deuman is leading the way now and has been since Chief Ostranga's retirement. And I commend her for that. I'm looking to build on all of those opportunities that already exist. In my first 90 days, it's going to be rough. Here's the thing. Listening is important. And I know out there in the community, folks are tired of talking and tired of the listening and they want action. This is going to take a little bit of time. Monona, we are just starting this process of in retrospect, and as far as time is concerned, of really getting to the roots and deep issues of some of these concerns that members have raised. And it's going to take some time for the new person to figure out what the volume is, what the perspectives are. I know a little bit of that from what I would categorize myself now as an outsider, right? Even though I live in the community, I live in the Monona-Dane County community, I have for some time, but I'm not a member of the police department. I'm not a member, I'm not a policy member. I'm not a member of this police and fire commission. And so I plan on doing a lot of listening, understanding, and comprehending, both internally and externally. And Mr. Hawkins, if there is room to implement some change in policy or practice or procedure in my first 90 days, I have some ideas, but again, I need input. I need to hear and listen, and I want people to guide and coach in that discussion, but ultimately the buck stops with the chief of police, or I'm putting it interim Chief Deuman as well. And that needs to happen. And I plan on doing that and many other things that I can spend probably most of this session describing that 90-day plan.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sarah, I'll ask you the same question. What will your plans and goals be during your first 90 days as police chief?
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I do have the benefit of having been here at the Monona Police Department for, well, my entire career. So luckily, as far as the conversations that Brian was talking about having with the officers, I've had quite a few of those conversations. However, it does never hurt to sit down and have those conversations again, especially with a new, more permanent role. I know there are definitely some policies that we've talked about in the Public Safety Committee that need to be looked at, and were really a priority, but kind of put on hold for the next permanent chief to be appointed. So looking at those policies that I know were something that they wanted addressed would be something I would want to focus on in the first 90 days. But also, as Brian said, reaching out to community members and just establishing the relationships. I've had an opportunity to do that a little bit, not a lot of it right now, while trying to kind of balance being short-staffed and taking on the new role. So I definitely like to do more of that and get to know some of the community leaders as well as our partners, business partners, within that first 90.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, Brian, I'll ask you a follow-up question first, because you recognize that this is going to be a lengthy process. This is going to take time. How do you navigate the urgency and the process? Because if it does take time, there are a lot of people who want this to happen right away. How do you navigate the urgency and the time that it'll take for processes to change?
Thank you. I think you outline sort of a timeline if you can give it, right? You establish what the goals are, and then you identify a timeline so that in full transparency, everyone is agreement that, hey, listen, I can appreciate that we want these 3 policies changed. I can appreciate that there's potential to do that tomorrow. What I can tell you is that that is not the right method, because the right method would be to involve discussion, involve our policymakers, involve our stakeholders, which are the community members and others in that review. I am not simply one to come into a space, and this is learned by trial and error, trust me, of going into a space and changing everything. Change takes time, and we're not there yet. We will get there, and here's the process, and here's the timeline, and here's where I need your help, because I cannot do this without you. I'm using I here, but I mean we. I mean the community. I mean the police department. I mean all of the employees, dispatchers, civilian staff, and officers. We need your help in getting there. And I think that, Mr. Hawkins, if I, as a leader of the organization, come with that approach, with the transparency of a timeline of shared goals and expectations, I think we can get there. I think we've seen that in policy change before. Change is never easy. It never comes fast. Reassuring folks that progress is being made, involving them in every step of the process so that they can feel it, see it, touch it, will help go a long way.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sara, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question as well. You've mentioned policies and potential changes that people have voiced a desire to change in Monona. How would you go about changing policies?
Well, having been in this position for about the last 6 months, we have had those discussions starting at the Public Safety Committee level. So, just excuse me, knowing what some of those policies are, and maybe some of the policies that I'm aware of that they're a little older, definitely need some updating. That's something that I would definitely put forth for the agenda on the Public Safety Committee. If it was, something that, obviously those are open to the public. We've been using the Zoom format, and so if if there are policies that, we definitely would like some community input on, I would foresee, in addition to putting that information on the website, using our social media account to try to get more engagement at the meeting for those issues that affect our community more. So basically, bringing it through Public Safety Committee and again through City Council, the process that needs to be done is how I would begin to address those.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna shift gears just a little bit. One of the things that I've heard from police officers is that right now, and you all I think have shared this well, this is a very stressful time for policing and police officers, and never was an easy job, I would imagine. But what steps would you take to increase and maintain morale among Monona's police officers? And Sarah, I'll ask that question to you. I'll start with you first this time.
Thank you. We have definitely been dealing with that here in Monona, probably over about the last year or so, maybe a little bit less. And it is a very difficult thing to deal with, because obviously we're wanting to balance the needs of the community and their desires, what they would like to see us doing with, the officers having those concerns about, overstepping or the negativity that they hear. And so, just kind of meeting with the officers, I think has been helpful, talking with them about situations that they may have had, and knowing that they have my support, and as well as the other members of the department supporting them, I think is helpful. And I think an overall majority of people are supportive of law enforcement, and sometimes we just need to be reminded of that. Again, as Brian previously said, there are community members that are distrustful of us, that don't like law enforcement, and we understand that, and our goal is to work with them. But there are a large majority of people out there that do support us. They do appreciate the job that we do, and we need to be reminding our officers of that.
And as a follow-up question, so do you offer or plan to offer any formalized help for stress relief, mental health, or other related services for the officers?
Well, we don't currently have anything specific to the police department, but we do, as a city, have an employee assistance program. So all of our officers are aware of the employee assistance program, and they can get different types of assistance, counseling for any of those issues that they have. If there are any officers that express, concerns beyond that, it's definitely not something that I would ignore, and we would want to pursue that further. But the program that we do have it's a very good program where they can at least get, some initial counseling or some assistance, whether it be financial or mental health or those kinds of things. And we also have a kind of a mentor program as well. It could be better established, and that's something that we could work on as well. But that has been beneficial, especially when we've gone through a few of our incidents over the past year, to have that mentor available to our officers.
Thank you. And Brian, I'll ask you the same question. What steps would you take to maintain or increase the morale among Monona's police officers?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. As somebody who helped start our peer support program and has got EAP on speed dial, because I am walking, living proof that those programs work. And as somebody who currently is responsible for special events for the police department, for the city of Madison, who, as this community has had, we've shared a similar experience in protest activity in 2020. And I was just working a command post not too long ago for folks expressing their First Amendment rights. But as also somebody who works in the city county building, and I walk on my way into my office along with the 70 other people I manage across 20 feet of lettering that is still on the pavement that reads defund the police. And so as you can imagine, walking into that environment and crossing that path, it leads to a range of emotions. We've cried, we've laughed, we've cried again, and we've laughed again. I'm trying to hold on to as much positivity as I can. And how I do that is I talk to my people. We're in this together. And it's not us, them. The community is a part of us. So we are experiencing a shift, and we are part of history. And what we're experiencing is that there are calls for change. And we need to listen, because we play a significant role in what's impacting a particular segment of the community. And we need to acknowledge and understand the concerns. Not that we necessarily agree. I don't agree with everything. I'm a cop, right? I live on two sides of the fence. I don't agree with everything, but I listen and I understand. And I have these conversations with my civilian and commissioned staff, and I get them together and I say, number one, you have to recognize that this isn't personal. That what is sent as a message outside of our office isn't about Brian Chaney Austin. It's about identified, and as this group has said, the movement, I should say, has said, is an identified wind of change that's needed. And we have to listen to what this group has said. And it's not about Brian. It's not about Jan. It's not about, Sheila. It's about the system. And we are a part of that. And it's going to feel personal, because what we do for a living is we're bonded by that experience, right, Sarah? We have that experience, and we put our lives on the line for, as I said before, folks we don't know. It's such a bonding experience, but you can't take it personal. It is a call for change, and you have to understand that. Now, that goes beyond discussion. I am not a therapist. That is not my background. As I said and referenced earlier, without going into too much detail, I have been saved by therapists. EAP and employee assistance and peer support and mental health advocacy is huge in our profession. I would look to institute and seek permission and seek funding potentially, and I know times are tough, right? But seek funding for wellness days for our employees so that they can go to a certified therapist. And listen, you'd be surprised if you sort of mandate that therapy and you get folks, some, not all, that say, I'm just going to sit there, boss, and not say a word. Okay, good luck with that. Go for it. And that's everything. That's your right to do. That's absolutely your right to do. But I want you to go. I want you to get in that door, because these people are professionals. We're going through something right now, and these folks will try to help keep the mold together. We need you to be physically strong and mentally strong. I think wellness days is something that I would certainly look to implement. I'd look to think about a peer support program so that, officers and civilian staff can communicate and rely on one another when they're in times of crises. We had the unfortunate incident in Madison where we lost one of our officers to suicide. And this is the most common cause of death for police officers is suicide by their own weapon. It's something I don't take lightly. It's something I talk about. I don't hide it in the shadows. I tell people this all the time. Your job should be, could be, and should be very rewarding. It's okay to love this job. It's okay to get a lot out of this job. But remember, the house always wins, to do a sort of a Vegas analogy for those of you who play poker around here. The house always wins. It's important for you to acknowledge that and to take care of yourself and be sure that you go home in one piece, mentally and physically. Be sure to lean on your loved ones and people who will always be there before this job or after. they're your support group to get you through the next day. And to lean on each other. I have this big poster that I made up in my office, and part of it says, promote positive attitude. Positive attitude is infectious, okay? And so I think that implementing a program, instituting wellness days as an option, and relying on each other and having open dialogue and discussions is critical for morale, and it's critical for mental health and wellness of the employees.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up question to that, and I'll start with you, Brian, first, and then I'll go to Sarah. So how do you plan to address your personal stress and mental health if you were to become the new police chief of Monona?
EAP is available to me too, right? I'm just verifying. Listen, I'm a human being. There will be stress. Sara, or Interim Chief Deuman, has expressed some of that, I think, in some of her responses. I expect there to be stressful times as police chief. I will lean on my support group. And I will try my best, Mr. Hawkins, to practice what I am preaching and rely on my support group, rely on mental health professionals, rely on positive activity. And you know, if I work out like I just did before this meeting, and it's overdue, but I just did, it helps me feel better. And there's a physiological science behind working out and taking care of your physical self, and that transpires to mental health and wellness too. So I'm going to try to practice what I preach in answer to that last question that you had that I will not take 10 minutes in explaining. Okay.
Thank you. And Sara, what about you? How are you planning on handling the stress and mental health wellness for yourself if you became the police chief of Monona?
Well, I guess what I have been doing in the last 6 months or so is relying on my family a lot. Spending time with my kids is great for my mental health, and it just kind of provides me that escape that I need to keep going. So definitely, though, the EAP program is something that is there and available, and I would encourage any of our officers to use it, and if needed, would also utilize that program.
Thank you. And this is one of the questions I'm going to phrase a little bit differently, because you all have talked about this, or at least mentioned it in some way. But there are many who are saying that policing as a culture, as a institution, needs to change today. And so, Sara, I'm going to ask you first. Changing a culture is hard, right? In a department is hard. How would you go about changing the culture of policing in Monona? And do you feel like policing in Monona needs to change?
I think there's always room for improvement, and we do need to change based on, not saying, our officers are bad. That is not what I'm saying at all. But in reaction to what the community wants, they have spoken, and we know that we need to listen to what they want for and from us. So as a department and working with them, we need to implement some changes to make sure that we're policing in a fair and equitable way. I think that any police agency is the same. We're not unique in Monona. This is a national issue that needs to be addressed, and implementing the changes is multiple things. Meeting with community members, again, finding out what it is that they want. What do they want from the department for them as a community? Looking at our policies, addressing issues that we may have, for arrests or citations, those kinds of things. What exactly is it that we can do to hear what they're saying and to implement those changes? And then also addressing those, with our officers. It's going to take time. It's going to take their buy-in. and, you know, nobody likes change, or at least I don't know anybody that loves or really likes change. So it's going to take work from all aspects, you know, from myself and relaying that information to them implementing those changes out on the street.
And one more follow-up question for you. How would you go about identifying the parts of the policing culture that needs to change?
Well, I think that we've heard a lot of it from the community already, and then also, you know, we're working with certain organizations, or I shouldn't say organizations, but for instance, the Community Restorative Court is something that we have been working with, and I know there's additional programs out there, sorry, that also strive to do the same thing. The Community Restorative Court, you know, offers a chance for somebody that has committed a misdemeanor to work through the Community Restorative Court by, you know, talking about what they did, you know, admitting what they did, and having the opportunity to have that charge not stick with them. There are similar programs that kind of do the same thing on the municipal ordinance level. And, you know, I think that's something that we definitely need to get more involved with. I'm aware of it. It's just, you know, finding the time to do that. You know, we need somebody that can take the time to focus on the program. And I believe Madison is already working with the YWCA on that. And so we have been contacted by them, and it's something that I would like to see us move forward to participate in.
Thank you. And Brian, I'll ask you the same question. You said earlier that you recognize that change was needed in policing. So how would you go about changing the culture of the department and changing that of you, police chief?
Well, I'd first start by saying I've changed. I've changed. I am not the same cop. I do not have the same opinions and views as I did 20 years ago. And I would probably, not to speak for interim Chief Deuman, but she's probably in the same boat. You have to change. You have to adapt. You have to listen, and you have to modify. It's okay to do that. But I can tell you, there's nothing wrong with police culture. That camaraderie, that sisterhood, that brotherhood, that's okay. That's what helps sustain getting through day by day. But we're not the only ones in that community. We have to look to others outside of the PD as fellow sisters and brethren, because they're with us too. And as my earlier point said, although we hear these calls for swift change and change now, that doesn't mean that they don't like Chaney Austin. That doesn't mean that they don't like interim Chief Deuman. What they're saying is that the system is flawed, in their opinion, that the group that I'm referring to. And I think that we have the opportunity to listen and to identify, okay, if this is a discussion from members of the community, if this is the movement that we are a part of, how can we best implement, or how can we best identify some of the things that they are wanting change so that they can feel safe? And that's the goal here, right? Is that we create a safe environment and a safe community for all. So let's hear some of your ideas. I would actually, I'm known for doing this, Mr. Hawkins. I would flip that on the onus on members of the department. Let's have a discussion. Let's invite people in to have these discussions with us. How can we make change happen? And for those of you who don't think that we need change, please explain that. Please explain to me why or how you've managed to go your entire career without changing one bit. I doubt any of you have changed at all, or have stayed the same, I should say. It's okay. And as interim Chief Deuman mentioned, change is hard. I think I mentioned I've been through 4 police chiefs in my time, and it can be challenging. That's okay. You accept it. So I don't necessarily think, Mr. Hawkins, to answer your question, that there's something entirely flawed with quote unquote police culture. What I do think is that there's opportunity to identify that there's a gap trust, to identify and discuss lapses of communication where leaders of organizations can do a better job of communicating with the public, where frontline officers and civilian staff and dispatchers can do a better job of engagement with the public, so that not only the public can understand who their police department is, but that the police officers and employees understand who they serve better. And so I think that that's very much worth discussion, something I'm willing to not only host myself, but hire or contract or beg and plead somebody from Nehemiah or somewhere similar to come in and to have these conversations with the department and myself.
Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to go to a similar question now. And so I think I'll start with Sara, and I've lost count. So if I've skipped the order, please forgive me.
I think it might be back to me.
Oh, it's back to you? Okay, yeah, we can. I'll ask you then. Great, thank you. Police departments nationwide have seen an increased difficulty in recruiting and retaining qualified candidates. What steps would you take to recruit qualified candidates and that are diverse population of officers?
I'm glad you added that last part. I was wondering if you were about diversity, because I think that goes hand in hand. We want a qualified and diverse work group. I think that's the ultimate goal here. Interim Chief Deuman has the high privilege and the struggle, I don't know if it is, Sara, of being the only commissioned woman in the Monona Police Department. And as I'm sure that the prior chief has held the standard, and others hopefully have the standard, that is not acceptable. That we should not hold that as being okay. We should not hold that there being one or two persons of color within any organization, no matter what the community in general looks like. The diversity of your police department is paramount, and understanding and appreciation of that community engagement and those differences that exist within the community. And it leads to discussion, and it leads to camaraderie and understanding, and it leads to a feeling, even if it's just a feeling, that, okay, I just saw, a female officer, and I can only identify because of my specific issue or my need that day with this female officer. Although the male officers probably have wealth of experience and are really good, and they're probably former therapists, and they probably can engage and have conversations just as good. But guess what? We're offering you an opportunity to engage somebody that looks like me, right? It doesn't necessarily can be your only option, but there's an option. And even if you're not engaging, passing by somebody who looks like me, who's in a position of authority and a tremendous amount of power that you all grant the police department, gives folks a sense of ease and calm. And I'm, again, like I started this conversation, I'm going to try to keep it real. This is Brian sort of relaying what I feel here. It gives me, a Madison police captain who's been doing this job for 20 years, a sense of calm when I see a trooper behind me who looks like me, or when I see, if I have a female friend in the car and I see, an officer that looks like her. I know that, that is a reflection of some of the goals and aspirations that agency has with respect to diversity. Diversity should be a core value and labeled as such in every mission statement, in every web page, in every letterhead of the police department, along with all the other core values that are equally as important. So I think, Mr. Hawkins, that it is not acceptable to be at the level of folks with respect to diversity where we're currently at, to include the agency I work for, and all law enforcement needs to strive to be a more diverse agency. I think recruitment is key. Some of the challenges that exist within the Monona Police Department, I understand and have an appreciation for, is that there's some limits, right? And only limiting it to potentially people who are already Wisconsin law enforcement certified. That does present its challenges, but I think that there are ways to overcome that. I'm ask around. I'm known for stealing people around here. Ask my partners at the Dane County Sheriff. Ask folks at Fitchburg. I don't mind it, and they do it to the Madison Police too. It's okay. Once I see talent and I see that there's opportunity, I'm going to have a conversation. Every single member of the police department is expected to be a recruiter for the city of Monona, in my opinion. There's opportunity there. But I think there's opportunity to have with the policymakers and those who hold the purse strings, a conversation about those significant challenges that exist when you can't necessarily reach a broader pool of applicants from those who don't have that law enforcement certification. That is something I'm very interested in engaging in conversation about.
Thank you. And Sara, I'll ask you the same question. Because of the difficulty in recruiting and retaining qualified candidates, what steps would you take to recruit qualified, diverse candidates?
We, as Brian touched on a little bit, we have had a history of requesting applicants have their 60 college credits. They are certifiable, which means they have the law enforcement academy, and are seeing a decreasing number of applicants in each of our processes. So we have had discussions internally, as well as with city administrators about adapting that process, looking past the requirements and looking into putting them through the academy. I know Madison has its own academy, and we utilize those through the Madison College and other technical colleges, but we're realizing that in order to attract additional applicants, and hopefully a more diverse pool of applicants, that we are going to have to lessen those restrictions. And that is something that we have reached out to find out what other communities are doing with putting somebody through that academy, and are kind of working through that process now to figure out how can we do that now with Monona and with a current process. Some of the things that I feel like we maybe need to do is do some targeted marketing toward the communities with people of color, and get out there and meet people and just say, we have this opportunity, and if it's something that you might be interested in, come have a meeting with us. Let's talk about what we might be able to do, even further, maybe more for the future, to reach out to high school students, middle school students, if they show any sort of an interest in that. Work with them through. I understand it's not something that's going to help us tomorrow, but if it helps us 5 years from now, we're always going to be looking to recruit and diversify the department. And yes, it was touched on that I am currently the only female officer here in Monona. When I started here, I started with another female, so there were 3 of us at one time. And just slowly over years of retirement, we've had a few come and go, but we haven't retained our female workforce, and that's definitely something that we need to work through as well.
Thank you. And so the next question I'll ask, and I think I'm back on track now. So Sara, I'll go to you first. What is your view of the use of police body cameras and the release of footage from those cameras?
We have been using police body worn cameras here for about 5 years. Since I'm in charge of the release of those, I will say that it has exponentially made my job more time consuming. But overall, I think it is the best thing that we ever did here in Monona. From, just a minor, officer complaint where we can look at the body worn camera, provide that to the citizen if they want it. It's great for evidentiary purposes as well. it has, all in all, been a great asset for us to be able to, you know, determine in those investigations if there was any wrongdoing or if there was not. And I guess I can't say enough good about them, other than redacting them takes a lot of time. And so again, that kind of just goes back to the records release of those. We have had some situations where, in working with other police agencies who are conducting investigations into incidents that happen here in Monona, we have not been able to release those in as timely a manner as we would have liked to. But I believe that the use of the body worn cameras and release of the video when we're able and as soon as we're able also helps go a long way to being transparent to the public and the community at whole. So I foresee that we would continue to use those here, and regardless of the expense and you know, of the cameras themselves and the servers that we need for the storage of the video, I would never imagine that we would take a step backwards and stop using them, because I think they're a great tool for our officers, and again, allow for that transparency for the public if they have any concerns about any police incidents.
Great, thank you. And Brian, I'll ask you the same question. What is your view of the use of police body cameras and the release of the footage from those cameras?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And coming from an agency that does not have body worn cameras, that wants body worn cameras, I can tell you that I support them. I agree that from many members of the community who express privacy concerns, that is certainly an issue. I think there's a balancing act. And a lot of these discussions, I've been a part of webinars and different online group discussions because of COVID with police executives. And this is an ongoing challenge and debate amongst police leadership of body worn cameras that is a public record and when to release those. I am an advocate that as soon as you can release information, as transparent, as early as you can be, even if you can't release all the footage, even if you can't release any footage because there's an overseeing investigatory agency, there at least needs to be a discussion. The footage belongs to the city of Monona. Ultimately, the city of Monona has say on what happens with the footage. Now, as chief, and in my role as captain, I'm also a de facto risk manager for the city, right? And so that, you know, you have to weigh in, you know, the balance of releasing the video and what legally you're being advised to do or not to do. And I think what's important is that the public receives as much information as quickly and as upfront as they can. And if I can't release a camera or a body worn camera, I guess you're going to have to look at me on TV explaining as many times as I can, as much as I can about the incident for as long as I can until we can release more information or that physical evidence and that record that is being requested. But I am in full support of body worn cameras. I think it's great that Monona was a leader in our community. We've looked to them at the Madison Police Department. We've looked to this agency and with respect to how that's worked. According to your interim chief, it was supported and has worked well. And I would look to continue that process. I think that there is a discussion that I would have to have with the policy makers and those in the executive section of city government about my belief on releasing body worn camera footage earlier during significant incidents and how I believe we are the record keepers of that and ultimately have the say. However, those are discussions I'm willing to have, and obviously in my position, I'm not privy to any of those that may or may not have happened already.
Thank you. And so Brian, I'm going to ask you the next question. Um, and this is, please describe your understanding of the principles of restorative justice as an alternative to traditional criminal justice approaches, and the appropriate role you think those principles can play in the Monona Police Department.
Absolutely. Thank you. And restorative justice plays a significant role in the healing process, right? Because that's what really this is about. It's the victim of the incident healing and the offender. Notice I didn't say suspect, but the person who offended or the victim, right? Also heals through that process. And there is a mutual or understood agreement between the two parties, as supported by law enforcement, as supported by members of the community, as supported by the prosecutors, in making sure that there's an equal healing process that exists. I've seen it work. We know it works. There's proven record time and time again that restorative justice programs are working. And I wholeheartedly support that and would do whatever I can to continue to advocate the use of those programs in the city of Monona. I think they need to be expanded on, frankly. And I think that, there's something to be said with my agency, our agency, interim Chief Deuman's current agency, that's, with the rank and file, with officers. Just because you can do something, just because you can make an arrest, just because you can write the ticket, doesn't necessarily mean you should. And there's many examples of sort of my philosophy on that I think that I would roll in to that conversation. So number one, I can think of, not to say that this is going to happen, but the concept of driver's license status, right? I have a valid driver's license. I think many of us here do, and there's a process in which to get that license. Not everybody in the community is so fortunate, right? It is an administrative function to suspend somebody's driver's license. And overwhelmingly, the reason is for lack of or failure to pay a fine. And the overwhelming reason why folks can't pay the fine is because they don't have the money. And so why then am I, as a law enforcement officer, going to issue a ticket for something that is going to add to the cycle, right? Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. Is there an alternative? Is there a discussion? Is there a restorative system that the Monona court has or can implement? Can you refer them to Operation Fresh Start that has a fabulous program that helps folks get their license back, right? Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And so these are some of the restorative justice type conversations I think I know are already happening in Monona. I would build on those, certainly.
Thank you very much. And Sara, I'll ask you the same question. So please describe your understanding of the principles of restorative justice as an alternative to traditional criminal justice approaches, and the appropriate role you think those principles can play in the Monona Police Department.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. As I mentioned earlier, that is something that I would like to see us participate in more. It has been, we have been participating in the community restorative court program through the DA's, well, it's not through the DA's office, but with our criminal arrests. And we have been contacted by the YWCA as well to participate in the restorative justice program that they facilitate. As I see what it is it provides an opportunity for many of the offenders that we are dealing with to kind of get a fresh start or get out from under any financial struggles, economic issues that they may have. As Mr. Chaney Austin said, it does no good to compound their problems. And so to continue to write them a citation after citation and, have that outstanding, citation, held over their head, or, whether it suspends their driving status, or, using tax intercept to take, tax return money away from them, it just compounds the problem. And so I think allowing them the opportunity to participate in the program, it allows, because I'm not real familiar with the restorative justice program through the YWCA, the community restorative court allows them to take ownership of what happened. It allows the victims in the incident to be part of the process too. I mean, they have to agree to the process as well. And so I think it kind of, in a sense, it helps everybody to become more whole and understand the entire process. And again, it's something that I would like to see us participate in more. I know in Monona, we don't have retail thefts, for instance. We do have a standard operating procedure where we don't write citations for low dollar amount items. And that was kind of our, before the restorative justice programs came out, that was kind of our way of doing this, where just because we go out there and somebody may have taken $5, $10, $15, $20 worth of merchandise, they don't always necessarily need a citation to compound the problems. And we do utilize that standard operating procedure quite frequently with offenders. And I think working through the restorative justice programs would definitely be more beneficial. It's definitely something that is used by other agencies, Madison and other police agencies. And my understanding is that it has been very successful with the participants.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think I would like to take a quick 5-minute break to let the candidates stretch, get something to drink. I know sitting in front of a camera for a long time can be challenging. So we'll come back at 7:50, if that's okay with everybody. And that way the candidates can have a chance just to catch their breath and get something to drink and stretch. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. I apologize. Your turn. No, that's all right. Please charge it to my heart and my mind, not my heart. So, but I will. So, Brian, I'll ask you. I apologize. I've been so engaged in the conversation. I've taken good notes about what you said. I have apparently missed a few of my initials along the way. So I'll go to you, Brian. Have you dealt with the use of force complaints against yourself or your department? And if so, how have you handled them?
The answer is yes and yes. And in my 20 years of working, as particularly in my experience in patrol, working downtown, having to have used the last resort of which is force to effect an arrest, apprehend a suspect. There have been unfounded complaints against me personally. But I think that that's important to have that. That option and that availability to forge a complaint, because perception is sometimes one of the things that leads one to not have an understanding as to what took place, and it provides an opportunity for the police department to not necessarily always be on the defensive, but to look into the facts, to do a good, thorough investigation, and to provide an answer to that. And so, yes, I have also investigated officers under my charge, and the same thing. I want to make sure that I am fair to the complainant. They understand what the process is, and they understand that if they don't agree with the process internally with the police department, that there are other options for them to file complaint with the Police and Fire Commission, with the city offices, or the state level, or even federal, should they choose. But we are going to do an internal process of review. It'll be a thorough investigation. I take those matters seriously. They're important. And I want to make sure that the complainant is kept up to speed as to the timeline of that process, where we are in the investigation, not necessarily releasing the details until we have the findings, but that there's communication with the complainant that the work is being done and that there is follow-up, so they don't feel as if perhaps nothing is being done. And so I think it's important to be as transparent as you can, but also respect the rights of the employee. Understand that he or she may have been 100% lawful with their within policy, under law, and using reasonable force. And sometimes, most times, using force is nothing that looks good, doesn't feel good, nor should it. But we are charged with that authority to do so, and to do so as at the lowest threshold possible to make that arrest or to take control of that situation safely. And we owe it to the public, we owe it to every complainant to explain that process and to give our findings.
Thank you. And Sarah, I'll ask you the same question. Have you dealt with the use of force complaints against yourself or your department? And if so, how have you dealt with that?
I have used force in my career here, but I do not believe I have had a use of force complaint. I could be wrong. I feel like I'm dating myself here with age that over 24 years, I don't recall ever having a use of force complaint, but I won't say that I for sure don't, but I just don't recall it. As far as investigating use of force complaints, yes, I have assisted in those investigations. Generally speaking, they have fallen upon the patrol lieutenant to investigate, but we did have some higher profile use of force complaints where we worked jointly on that. And, we felt that was obviously very important to make sure we listen to everything that the person complained about and address all of those issues. We were lucky enough that we had video in the incident, so we kind of had that eyewitness. You can't argue with that in the complaints. And although the determination, maybe was that they used a reasonable amount of force and the officers didn't face any discipline for it. We wanted to be sure that, we dotted all our I's and crossed our T's to make sure we addressed any issues that were brought forward in the complaint and explain the reasonings behind those to the complainant, and also allow them to be able to see the video so they could see everything that happened. Obviously didn't want anybody to think that we were trying to, brush it under the rug or anything like that, and that we did take their complaint seriously and investigated it thoroughly.
Thank you. And Brian, a follow-up question for you about the use of force and investigations or complaints. What have you learned from the process of investigating those or being involved with those?
Yeah, and thank you. And then, as Interim Chief Deuman was talking, it sort of jogged in my head that, geez, I've been around for a long time too. And so I was giving you my first response about my personal complaint history to the best of my knowledge. I mean, so I'll leave it at that. There were certainly no sustained violations of use of force complaints against me. But I think what you learn is that it's important when officers do use force in those unfortunate situations that do occur, but they occur, that an explanation is provided, that there's care given to that subject who force was used against. And there's policy that supports that. I know that Monona policy does support that as well. But that follow through actually takes place, not only to the person in which force was used, but also any bystanders who may be around. Take the time to offer an explanation, take the time to explain what occurred, so that there's a better understanding, so that folks who just got there at that last second of the force knew what precipitated that, had an understanding as to hey, I understand that you saw that I unfortunately had to decentralize this young lady. Please know, here's the reason why I came here. I tried dialoguing. You know, the offender did X, Y, and Z. I did X, Y, and Z. I'm trained to do X, Y, and Z. This was the last resort. It's unfortunate it happened. We're looking after this person. Do you have any questions? That's great. That's being a professional law enforcement officer who cares about the community, who cares about the subject, and who understands that it's important to have discussions so that you can give input into the narrative before the narrative writes itself. And so I think that, I've learned a lot over the years that those conversations weren't always happening 20 years ago, with either the subject or the public. And more we're seeing the benefits of that. And that's something that I would make sure I implemented and encouraged and checked. Thank goodness the body worn cameras at Monona, to make sure that those audits are taking place, that those interactions are actually happening, that follow through is actually taking place.
Thank you. And Sarah, I'll ask you the same question concerning the use of force, investigations or interactions. What have you learned from those?
The one thing that I have learned from those is the perception of the person that is, complaining about the use of force, is that they were wronged. And, it does us no good as law enforcement officers to make them feel like they shouldn't be making the complaint, like they're wrong, like we're accusing them of any wrongdoing in the case. I think it's definitely beneficial for us to listen to them, even if it's not a sustained complaint, and that it's important for us to describe the reasons to them as well for why we did what we did, that we exhausted all other avenues. We asked you to do this, 5 times, not 5, but 6 times, and, tried to gain the compliance, and this is, what we're trained to do. They took it to the next level, and just to the point that they were able to gain compliance. They didn't go above that point. And so I think, just like we said, explaining our reasoning, explaining, why we have to do what we do is very important. And I would agree that it goes a long way to explain that to any bystanders, because what you see now is, people have their phones out, they're videotaping everything, and they might get just that last little bit of interaction where they miss the first, 5 minutes of, is there anything that we can say or do to make you, cooperate with us today? They're missing those interactions, and it's important to make sure that everybody has the full picture, and try to be, transparent in that way. I think is definitely a good thing. Sometimes we run into people that just have the distrust of law enforcement, and that makes it even more difficult. They tend not to believe, what we have to say to them, but I still think it's important to communicate that with them.
Thank you. And the next question, Sarah, I'll start with you. Connected to this, because you all have been talking about interactions with the public, what would your approach be to addressing the mental health issues of the people that you come in contact with?
So that is one of the other things that we face, being a smaller department. We don't exactly have the ability to have special teams for mental health citizens and community members in place. What we have done is we've had, I believe it's 4 officers that have attended some specialized training in that, dealing with patients with mental health. And, we try to utilize them when we can, but again, we don't necessarily have one permanently on any shift. We don't, have a team of officers available. So we utilize our community resource officer as one of those officers who's had the training to, do outreach if necessary, or allow those community members to contact him directly here at the police department. We, have training for all of our officers through in-service training, in dealing with mental health patients. And unfortunately, sometimes the process dealing with mental health subjects is very cumbersome, and it's not always, in my opinion, in the best interest of those patients. It's very time consuming, and again, it's not, taking that person into custody is not always going to be the best thing for them, for their mental health, I guess. But in an effort to keep them safe, sometimes that is what we have to do. But just definitely through training, whether it be through in-service training, online training, we have done some of that as well, short webinar type trainings, just to kind of keep a refresher with the officers, so they're aware of situations and services that may be available to them.
Thank you. And Brian, I'll ask you the same question. What approach would you have the department take in addressing the mental health issues of people they come in contact with?
Right, great, thank you. I very much doubt that there's one person in this virtual room that hasn't been touched by mental illness somehow, and I can speak to that personally. When all law enforcement officers interact with persons with mental health issues, it's typically when they were in crisis, right? And managing that and understanding that comes with training, and it comes with discussion, and it comes with making sure that officers are comfortable and equipped to handle those situations. And that includes persons who are under the influence due to substance abuse as well. I think you train, and Interim Chief Deuman mentioned that several times, and I'll keep mentioning it. You train, but you also network. I acknowledge that this position, if I were so appointed, I would be going to a smaller agency that doesn't necessarily have a team of officers dedicated to mental health, such as the Madison Police does. But here's my thought. We do have an opportunity potentially to equip and train officers as liaisons so that they acquire a specialty potentially in being able to handle and address some of the concerns within the mental health community, and are able to perhaps guide and coach and mentor officers who do have to respond to certain crises situations. But we work and live in a fabulous community of many, many experts. And Dane County Journey Mental Health is somebody who we absolutely need to rely on heavily for their expertise and guidance. There's a variety of nonprofit organizations who exist, who are more than willing to help police help others and to help their clients in recovering from whatever crises they are experiencing. And I understand that most of these calls do take a significant amount of time. I think we invest in that time. I think we be sure that we provide an opportunity to not put Band-Aids on situations, that we're really looking after the best interest of that person who is in crises. And unfortunately, that does involve, because law enforcement, our hands are sort of tied when it comes to the issue of emergency detention, for example. That does involve a significantly long and burdensome trip to Winnebago, which takes 4 hours plus round trip. To be honest, I'm not overly concerned with the officers who are making that trip. I'm concerned with that person who has to be in the backseat of a squad car or an apparatus for that long. And remember, they are in crisis, right? So it's important that we have the officers and employees who are trained and equipped and understand the variety of mental illness that exists, understand how to dialogue and interact with persons, have an appreciation for coming up with a game plan before responding, before acting, being okay to say, hey partner, stop, let's talk about this. We've got some time. That should happen. And I want to introduce, if not already, and this is where some of my ignorance is, Interim Chief Deuman, is ICAT, and making sure that there's this implementation of the integrated communications and assessments and tactics training that is sort of the new age of response to critical incidents for police departments. The Madison Police Department just went through it. I can tell you, I walked in there, and quite frankly, this is Brian again, putting on my Brian hat, saying, here we go again. And I was blown away by this training. It is definitely something that should be utilized and implemented at every police department in this country. Being able to pause and take breath is something that's very hard for cops to do, right? And just to reassess and to come up with a game plan and slow down and try to figure out, do I need to go in? Should we stand out? Can I make a call? What about getting crisis on the line? Should I call family? Should I check through our contacts to see what other history this person had? There might be opportunity for that. Sometimes there's not, but the vast majority of time, there's opportunity for that. And coming up with a game plan and relying on your training and relying on your in-house experts and your external experts so that you can have the best possible outcome for that person in crises, that's our goal. That's what we should be focused on. And that's something that I planned on reinforcing if appointed as chief.
Thank you. And I think that'll lead us right into our next question. And Brian, this is going to be for you. I actually planned ahead this time to make sure I didn't skip over you, so I apologize. So Brian, this is your question. Monona, like many questions, they must provide police services with a limited budget. So how can a police department be efficient in its use of resources?
Yes, there will probably not be a one day in which there's a vast amount of resources available to any police agency. Budget's important. And as a city manager, as a department head, you're a fiscal steward of the city. And I appreciate that now, having hundreds of thousands of dollars in my charge. And if you include the salaries of those 70 employees in which I manage, that amplifies into the millions. And so I understand and appreciate budgets. I understand prioritization of the needs. I've been a fan of saying yes. I've not been a fan of saying no when we have various needs, but it's my job to say no. It's my job to prioritize. And it's certainly the job of the chief to have that method in place. My goal is to make sure that our officers, our employees, our civilian staff and dispatchers have the equipment and tools they need to do their job safely, to do it effectively, and to make sure that we attain the goals that the community expects and meets the standard that the community expects. If there's a budget item that is preventing us from getting to that goal, you best be sure you're going to hear it from me. If I can relay to you that we are unable to effectively provide police services because we're lacking space, or because we're without a particular piece of equipment that is critical, and what you say, you as in the community say, is something that we need to institute and implement, I'm going to advocate for that. And it's up to the policymakers to make that decision. I respect that difference, right? But I am going to advocate for things that I believe we need. And no, it's not going to be everything. I will be saying no to some things internally after some discussion, internal discussion. But there will be things that I think that you can expect me as chief, if identified by the community and internally as a need, that I will put on the front page. And so I think I have a reputation of operating fiscally within my current assignment as a captain charged of 70 individuals, all of the traffic grants that the City of Madison Police Department receives in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, all of the money that goes into running events like Freak Fest, Shake the Lake, formerly Rhythm and Boons, Mifflin Block Party, and all of the police resources that are assigned to all of these specialty events, an entire Madison Police Crime Lab and Forensics Lab, all of the evidence in property that we're responsible for maintaining and keeping. I have practice at this. Not to say that, and I respect wholeheartedly what Chief Ostrenga has done and Interim Chief Deuman is doing. The job of a chief is different than job of a captain at Madison Police, and I respect that. But I also have a good deal of experience in budget, respect for being fiscally responsible, and understand that I need to advocate and prioritize when time to do so.
Thank you. And Sarah, I'll ask you the same question. Like many communities, Monona has to work within a limited budget. And so how can the police department make the most and the best use of those limited resources?
Well, we, yeah, as you said, have been working with a limited budget. That's something that is not new to Monona. Some of the things that we have done over the years are, I have taken on some of the, IT work that's related to squad cars and setting up the squad computers and those kinds of things, which is great, because, then I have the knowledge of how to fix something if it goes wrong. I just don't always have as much time as I'd like to be able to make sure that everything is running smoothly. So with that being said, we definitely have a focus on the officer safety, and if there are items that equipment or what have you that we need, that's something that we can take to our council and explain our needs to them. One of those items that we did bring forward was the body worn cameras years ago, when we needed the server for the storage space of the video. Those were some things that were very important to the officers, the police department, and in presenting that to the city, it was something that they agreed as well was important for our operations and safety of officers and the community. So we prioritize our needs, and I guess work as well within the budget as we can. And when we're not able to, or we know we're going to exceed the budget, it's something that we just need to bring forward to our elected officials and hope that we can find some money somewhere to help us out with that. And if it's not the case, maybe look for other areas where we might be able to make some cuts.
Awesome. Thank you. So it looks like we have time for one more question. And so, Sarah, I'll start with you for this one. What do you see as the most important factor in training police officers to deal with racism and implicit bias among community members and officers themselves?
I believe that we need, first of all, I think we kind of need to do some self-reflection. I know that's not something that we can change, but take a look at what we're doing, and is there anything that we are doing, any policies that we need to look at that maybe this is something that we could tweak and change to make it better for everybody. But are there any, again, with the self-reflection, is it something that we can see, like, maybe I have been, doing this, or maybe in, the enforcement of the laws being, black and white, do I need to look at, there's a middle ground here, and there is room for improvement, and, utilizing other programs to make enforcement more equitable. The training, currently we are with a training consortium to try to kind of allow for more input we have more officers through the 5 agencies that we train with. And the hope is that, we can get maybe some additional training coming into, instead of just the online training that we've kind of been having to deal with through COVID and just budgetary reasons. But, can we draw somebody in? Can we get some in-person training, work with other agencies? Not to throw you out there, but, the city is engaged with Nehemiah to try to determine what we can do, not only as a police department, but as a city, the whole city, and, trying to deal with any racism issues that we may have, recruiting, more diverse candidates, that kind of thing. So we can't have enough training, but it's just a matter of, we want to make sure that we're getting good training and we're doing the right things within the department to make sure that we are addressing any concerns of the citizens that we might have that, deal with any racism or inequities here at the police department and city as a whole.
Thank you. And Brian, I'll ask you the same question. What do you see as the most important factor or factors in training police officers to deal with racism and implicit bias among community members and officers themselves?
Great, thank you. So I think as I was sitting through there and listening to Sarah's good response to that question, I kind of want to answer this to 2 different audiences. Obviously, I want to answer this to the community who owes it to hear this response from me, but also to the members of the Monona Police Department. Listen, I value you. I think that you are exceptional workers. I think that you are ethical people. And I hope to be able to sit down someday and share the stories of my own personal bias that I have and I recognize. Being in law enforcement for 20 years, and with the Madison Police Department, how we share information is through email. One of the things that we do with our email is we share the significant calls of the day through email. Oftentimes, subconsciously, it took me a while to realize that this was making an impact, but that when you read these emails and they list the subject not only by name, but by race, that plays a role. And when you're looking at email after email after email for 20 years of male Black suspect, female Black suspect, male Hispanic suspect, subconsciously, you don't realize it's happening, but there's a development of even more bias. And I'm a person of color. I'm a person of color, as I think all of you can see. And I think that recognizing, whoa, Brian, this aspect of your job is having an impact on you. It's having an impact on how you potentially see people and interact with people. And you need to check that, Brian. And you need to have an appreciation and understanding that you're going through this. And that is something that everyone has. Maybe not as overt as the example I gave you, but this implicit and unconscious bias is something that everyone has. And so to Interim Chief Deuman's point, I'm not a religious man, but amen to that statement, Sarah, that there needs to be a reflection, a self-reflection, and an understanding that these problems and these issues and implicit bias exists, and they're real, and we all have it. And let's talk about it. And let's be okay to have these candid discussions and have conversations. I just mentioned I'm not a religious man, although I grew up in the Catholic Church. But I'm going to be in churches. I plan on it, and I plan on taking some of my employees with me potentially if I'm so appointed. Let's talk to the Black church community. Let's talk to the Latino church community, or the non-religious communities for that matter. And let's have these sit-down conversations about bias and some of the things that they've experienced when interacting with a police officer. Let's talk about our own guttural reactions and things that we regret thinking or feeling or seeing or saying, I should say. And that's okay. But before you're able to be a better cop, or be a better employee or a civilian employee or be a better dispatcher, you first have to acknowledge it. And through acknowledgement comes training. We will find the training. And that we work in a great community with a lot of groups. There's free training out there. Plug your ears, Mr. Hawkins, but there's free training out there. But there's also some reputable organizations who charge a fee. And I don't think that there's no price too much to pay on something that is such a critical and pivotal issue in law enforcement in particular, and society, period. So certainly that's one of the things that I plan on implementing sooner than later, is a discussion point around bias, around race. And like I've started this conversation, Monona employees, I know you are good people. Trust me, I would not be putting in for this position if I did not think that you are good people. I think you're qualified. I think you're exceptionally skilled at what you do. I think that there's opportunity for leadership. That's why I'm putting in. I think there's opportunity as your interim chief fully believes that too, no doubt. And I support her and her endeavors as well. But I want the community to know that there will be discussions, there will be training, and we need your help. And there will be time in which I'm going to be knocking on your door and into that church and into your store. And I'm going to ask you to come and talk to us, or let us come and have conversations with you. That's my plan.
Well, thank you. And thank you to both candidates. You all have done a fantastic job of hanging in with a long line of very difficult questioning. So thank you for showing up virtually. And we do appreciate that. And for the community members that are here, if you want to provide the Police and Fire Commission with additional feedback following this link, following this event, we will actually have a link that has been put in chat that you can do that. And this interview will also be recorded. So if you need to look at this again, process some more thoughts, you'll have access to the recording and you can do that as well. So I'm going to turn it over now, and this will be posted to YouTube tomorrow morning. I'm going to turn this back over to Steve Brezinski.
All right. Thank you. And thank you so much for moderating this. I think you did a fantastic job, and I really enjoyed the candidates and the moderator, and thought it was great. So Brian has posted in the chat function of Zoom the way to provide us with feedback following the event. We would like that if possible. I think certainly Sunday afternoon would be great if we could get that. The earlier the better, because we have a limited amount of time to process it. We're starting our interviews Monday morning. And so anything you can get us about comments, questions we should ask, further questions for the candidates would be helpful to have sooner rather than later, so we can have time to think about it before we put all of our questions together. With that, I would thank everyone for attending, and we are going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.